Okay, guys, moving on to the Sega game we have to play this week. I chose one that was very near and dear to my heart. While most people think of Sonic the Hedgehog when they think of Sega, I think of Mortal Kombat, a game Sega actually had very little to do with other than, porting the game into their system. And the reason behind that is because we had a Sega Genesis, or my brothers had a Sega Genesis. And it was one of the systems that I was relegated to while they played the new systems, the PS1, the N64. While they played those, I played the NES, the SNES, and the Sega Genesis. And Mortal Kombat was one of the games they had on the Genesis. And I absolutely loved it, and it was a game that I still love to this day. The corniness, the over-the-top gore, and right here is something special. I still remember this. ABACABB. I just turned on blood in the game. That was a very important part of this game, and the game itself was one of the games that ultimately led to the creation of the ESRB because there's highly graphic things going on. People ripping spines out, being burnt to skeletons, and you get hit in the nose and a gallon of blood comes out. It was an important game, but not more important, but as important is it was one of the games that was front and center in the console wars. And the Sega version, it doesn't look as nice as the Nintendo version. The sound isn't as good as the Nintendo version, but the Sega version was not censored. It still had blood. It still had, heavy fatalities. There were no changes. So there's something to be said about, this game and the way it looks, the way it plays versus the Nintendo one, because it was, it wasn't toned down. It was almost for like the bigger kids. Mortal Kombat was kind of the rebel game, and if you bought the toned down version of that rebel game, you weren't obviously I'm not thinking you weren't giving it the respect I guess it deserved. You weren't truly being rebel. You were being a kid, and you were playing it on the same system that Mario was on. And there's something to be said about that desire to see all the blood and guts, and then to decide for yourself whether or not you want it. I mean, I entered the blood code for an example, and of course I usually entered it just because that was the part of the game, that was the fun of Mortal Kombat. And I think as a feature, that's something we kind of see today. We see it in exclusives. I just lost, but we see it like in game exclusives where Sony has something, or Microsoft has something, Nintendo has something. And we see it, about stores even today. We have exclusive DLC. And this was one of the things that gave Sega something that was its own, an edge in fighting Nintendo. Nintendo might have had the better looking Mortal Kombat game, but it didn't have the blood. And for those who, gathered around in the arcades to, figure out the buttons for fatalities, that was the heart and soul of the game. I mean, you can play it on SNES, but what's the fun? I mean, why would you not just, choose something like, Street Fighter 2? Very good game, Street Fighter 2. Very fun game on SNES. But it wasn't Mortal Kombat. I mean, if you wanted that charm of this game and the real heart and soul of it, you went to the Genesis. And I think that really illustrates why certain systems, regardless of how well they do, do have certain loyal followings, and I think a lot of it has to do with games and deals struck with games. Um, there are a lot of systems that obviously didn't do well, but have audiences for them. And I think even though the Genesis, we can look back on the Genesis and say it kind of lived in Nintendo's shadow, and it really wasn't. It was a challenger, but now that we look back on it, it was very one-sided. Mortal Kombat was one of those games that was really Sega's own, even though you could get it on either system. Um, but to be able to do fatalities and see all the blood and gore, and to punch somebody and not see that weird gray sweat that comes out, it was something, and it gave it an air of rebellion. When you could play with your friends and punch them in the face, and all the blood would come out on the screen. And of course, by the time I was playing this, there were probably already four sequels to Mortal Kombat at that time. By the time I started playing the first one, and of course I remember Mortal Kombat 3 at the local pizza parlor. But nonetheless, playing this game on the Genesis was a big experience for me, and I probably made this one of my longest, talking things. And it's because you can tell I really, really enjoy playing this game. It does kind of mean something to me. And even though it doesn't look as good as the rival console's version, it's that combination of the fact that it has something that the other doesn't, and the fact that that was the system I played it on. I played it on SNES years later, um, but it was the Genesis to me that is the Mortal Kombat machine. And I loved having the chance to play it, and thanks, and I look forward to talking about it.